I always find the first monthly setup in a new journal just a little bit nerve-wracking. Oftentimes I want to try some new things out, experiment with some different layouts, but experimentation always comes with the possibility of things not working out for us. I don't think that'll be the case in this one. I'm feeling pretty good about the layouts that I set up, and the first one we're doing is a monthly dashboard. This one effectively just sees me splitting the page into 3 separate sections, using this very nice decorative tape from the washi tape shop. I really appreciated it for the bright and fun color palette, which I thought was a really nice start for the start of the year. As the title of the video suggests, yes, this is a January setup, and even though the color palette is a little bit more summery, I think that a bright start to the new year is fun regardless of where you're based. As said though, this dashboard page is just going to have 3 separate sections that could be used in a variety of ways. For instance, you could separate it into 3 key areas of your life, so maybe things for work, things for home, things for yourself. It could be 3 separate projects. The way that I would typically use this would be something like action steps for my goals versus projects that I want to work on outside of my goals, and then that third box for just monthly tasks in general. I'm not putting any titles into the boxes of this setup though, because this journal isn't actually for me. This is one that we set up a couple of weeks ago as a giveaway journal. That giveaway is now finished. The journal is on the way to the winner. I so hope that it arrives before the new year. But effectively what I did was fully set up 6 months in this journal from January through to June, including all of the start of journal pages, the monthly setups, and all of the weeklies. I always find setting up a journal for somebody else, especially somebody who I don't necessarily know or I don't know who it's going to go to, just a little bit of a fun challenge. So thinking about setting up layouts that can be used in multiple different ways. So just like this monthly dashboard page we have here. In terms of timing, the monthly dashboard took about 7 minutes to set up from first touch of the pen. This time of course doesn't include the idea generation time or like layout planning time. Previously I would say that this wouldn't include sketching in time, but I didn't really do any sketching in when I did this setup. Was that a good idea? Yet to be seen. But with the dashboard page set up, then we're over onto the right hand side to set up a cover page. Now I've stepped away from using cover pages in my personal journal this year, mainly because I wanted to replace it with something that was a bit more functional than just decorative. But I do love a cover page for being a very clear indicator when we're moving from one month to the next. I figured for this cover page I would go with one of my all-time favorite styles, which I'm just going to call the Bitsy wave design, because it's effectively a wave shape that's made out of a bunch of little bits. In this case, those little bits came from the washi tape that we're using all the way throughout this setup. And I love that these ones were PET stickers, so they're actually kiss cut on the roll of tape, which meant I didn't have to go and cut out around each of the individual elements myself. Certainly helped to save me some time, even though this style of layout does take a little bit of time. For this one, it was probably about 20 minutes to set up. A lot of that time just being me trying to figure out where the stickers were going to go and how they could actually fit together nicely so I didn't have any like bald spots in my wave. You'll see that to help myself along, I also did a little pencil sketch to show where the corners or edges of the wave were going to go, just to help guide me in the placement of those stickers. If you wanted to do a layout like this for yourself, but you didn't necessarily want to use a whole bunch of stickers, because sticking them all down and finding the right placement can be a little bit time consuming, you can of course fill this with little doodles, or make it super simple and just fill it with dots or something similar. It can be so visually impactful because you have those really nice kind of blank spaces in the other corners to balance it out. Definitely one of my favorite go-to cover pages, even though I don't really do cover pages for myself anymore. With this spread done though, it's time to flip on over to where we're going to have the monthly log. This was another kind of fun one to set up because I don't do monthly planning anymore in my journal. I do cyclic planning, so my monthly calendars are always just 4 weeks long. But given this journal isn't actually for me, and the majority of people still plan with the months, that meant that I actually had to be careful to have the right number of days on this calendar. I felt very good that I didn't stuff this one up in terms of the spacing. That is certainly not true for some of the monthly calendars I set up in here. But for this one, I decided to continue with the color palette that we've been using, with that kind of peachy or orange tone, just using 2 of my Tombow dual brush markers to achieve those. Any of the darker lines are going to be like the header bar for all of the daily boxes, whereas the lighter ones just add some visual interest to the page and also make our calendar more readable. I love a second line highlight for making something a little bit more readable or a little bit more visually interesting. And I did find that because I was nervous about stuffing up, I feel like I made more stuff ups because of it. Some of my lines did get a little bit wobbly, but it wasn't anything that we couldn't fix with a little bit of white sticker paper. White sticker paper is my go-to for mistake fixing because the texture, or kind of like finish of the sticker paper, is really similar to what we already have in the notebook. This means that if you want to go over the top with a pen or marker, you're going to get something that looks quite similar to the other stuff you've already put into the journal. I find that if I try and use like a white gel pen or a white paint pen, writing over the top of those doesn't usually go super well for me, but the white sticker paper I can trim to just the size I need and stick it over the top. Now, if you've been around the channel for a second, you'll know that I love a ruled line. Me and my ruler are great friends. I like things to be very straight, very uniform, but given the theme I was going with for this setup, I thought it would make more sense to have something that looked a little bit more soft, maybe a little bit more dainty. Soft and dainty aren't terms that I would typically use to describe much of what I create, so this was still a fun challenge, but rather than ruling in the lines for the grid, I decided to freehand them and use a broken line for this. This was something that I actually used repeatedly throughout the journal, and it certainly got my reps in terms of practice, but I do love the way that it doesn't add a whole bunch of heaviness in terms of like a lot of black line work to the setup, though I also think it helped that I used a pen with a finer line weight. In terms of timing though, the monthly log spread took about 18 minutes to set up, with a little bit of that time going to mistake fixing, including fixing up that little bit of torn paper that you might be able to see towards the bottom of the right hand side. I found that sometimes when I placed down a sticker, it really just needed to be moved. I wasn't happy with the placement, and effectively the first sticker that I put down on this layout I wasn't happy with. It was kind of laying more towards the calendar boxes, and then I decided I more so wanted them around the outside, but that one wasn't too hard to fix either. I just went in with a little glue pen and stuck that down. I think I could have done a little bit better about balancing the colors on this layout, mainly because we have the yellow florals in really only one part of the layout, but I do appreciate that because all of the decoration style is the same, like all of the decorative stickers are from the same roll, they still look like they match together even though the coloration isn't exactly the same every single time. Monthly log finished though, and now it's time to flip on over to some trackers. To do this tracker page, I'm using a printable from my little shop. That one's linked in the description box along with any of the other materials I used, and the nice part about using a printable is that I could just print it off on sticker paper, cut out the individual calendars, and stick those in rather than having to draw all of the lines myself. Certainly a time saver. In terms of timing, this tracker page took about 9 minutes to set up, but if I had to draw all of the calendars in myself, that time certainly would have been longer. Now, because I'm setting this up for somebody else, I don't necessarily know how many things they want to keep track of. I also don't know if the term habit tracker really resonates with them, or if they'd rather call it routines. For that reason, I did decide to call this page keeping track rather than making it a habit tracker or a routine tracker. It does mean that our giveaway winner could also track things that aren't habits or routines on here. For instance, maybe they want to keep track of certain days within the month where certain happenings occur. For instance, days that they have social events, or days that they have sport practice, or whatever else. Maybe it's more of a schedule page than a habit tracker. But so that they have ample space to keep track of whatever they want to keep track of, I set this one up so that it has 8 mini calendars. I placed these in what is effectively a 3x4 grid, just leaving some blank spaces so that I could include some more of those stickers for decoration. This is the general structure that I actually went with for every month, mainly so that they then had the same number of trackers for every month, and of course also so that I could make the pages look a little bit decorative. I personally find that if my journal is nice to look at, if I like the way it looks, I'm much more inclined to actually use it. Above each of the calendars though, I just highlighted a little space that they can write in whatever it is they're keeping track of, and I also didn't specify how they're going to fill this in, so they could use a check mark or a cross or color in a box if they wanted to, but because the pens that I have aren't necessarily what they have in their collection, I didn't want to dictate how it should be filled in. On to another layout that is quite flexible in terms of how you could use it. This one I'm setting up so it is a 1 line a day page. Now what this 1 line is used for is again completely up to our giveaway winner, so they could use it for a gratitude log, maybe a daily highlight, one priority that they have for the day, a little memory, something they learned, a tidbit. It really is up to them. Effectively though, because it is a page where there is 1 line for each of the days of the month, I just titled this page as 1 line a day. The actual structure of the page is quite simple. it's just a second line highlight for each of those days, and then I put the numbers down the left-hand side to indicate which day it was for. Because they're not necessarily going to use these specifically tied to the days, I didn't put any initials in. For instance, maybe they just want to write out 31 individual items. But in terms of timing, this layout took about 8 minutes to set up. I did find that when I put the decoration down in the corner, I could still see the line work underneath it, which bothered me a little bit. Thankfully, these PET stickers weren't too hard to pull up without completely ruining the page, so I could just stick a little bit of that white sticker paper underneath over the top of the line work to disguise the fact that it was there to start with. In making a journal for someone else, you kind of have to do a lot of predicting as to what's actually going to be useful for them, which is definitely very difficult when you don't actually know who the journal is going to. While I have tried to make a lot of the layouts flexible as I've been setting it up, I can't necessarily predict every single layout that our giveaway winner was going to need, so I also wanted to put in a spread for infinite possibilities. Effectively, this layout can be used in any way they want because it's mainly blank, just a little bit of decoration in the corners and that header bar. I of course didn't fill in what the header was because I don't know what this layout's going to be used for, but I wanted to keep the available space on the layout very open so that it offers them a lot of flexibility in terms of what they can set up here. I didn't want to add in, for instance, like too much decoration and kind of limit them in terms of the space or the actual available working area, so I stuck to putting those decorative pieces in the bottom left and top right corner. So that the page looked a little bit more complete, I also did an outline border around the outside, again just using that broken hand-drawn line so that it tied in nicely with the rest of the setup. Because this page is quite minimal, there's not really a lot to it, it did only take 5.5 minutes, with a decent chunk of that time going to putting the header bar in, because as you might have noticed for a lot of the headers that I've used in this setup, I've been masking the page with washi tape to make sure that the line that I get is very crisp and very clean. This is a trick that I really like to use anytime I'm doing one of those line highlights where the color pen I'm using is a little bit more punchy, a little bit more saturated, so if I go kind of cattywampus skew whiff with it, it would look a lot more obvious. To safeguard myself from doing anything like that, I do just use the masking trick with a washi tape that either doesn't stick very well, so it's not super useful to me otherwise, or washi tape in a design that I don't really like. It means that that washi still gets use in my collection, but it's used more in a kind of functional, assistive way rather than a decorative way. Here though you can see we're drawing out a bunch of boxes because this is the first of our weekly spreads. I decided that in this journal I wanted to have a range of different weekly spreads, but I often find that when I'm trying out a weekly, it takes more than just one iteration of using it to figure out if it actually gels with me, to figure out if it's something that actually kind of aligns well with my planning preferences. For that reason, rather than doing a different weekly style every single week, which would have been like 26 or maybe 27 different weeklies for the entire of the journal, which like I definitely could do it, but it would have taken a lot of time, effort, and energy, and I set up the entire of this journal in 1 week. Instead, what I decided to do was use the same style of weekly for every month. So in January, we're going with what I like to call the 8-box weekly. This is where you split each of your pages in half both vertically and horizontally, so that you end up with 4 boxes per page, or 8 boxes for the entire spread. 7 of these boxes get assigned to each of the 7 weekdays, and then the 8th box can be used for something else. What I actually used the 8th box for changed depending on which spread we're looking at. So in this first one, I used it as a quote space, kind of just to introduce us to the new month, to the new year, and the quote that I ended up going with was "Trust in the magic of new beginnings." I did have to look up how to spell beginnings. I had to pause halfway through that word because I was like, how many N's should there be here? I don't want to spell the quote wrong in a journal that's not for me, that would feel kind of poor form. But this style of weekly is just great for anybody who wants something simple, something reliable. This is the style that my partner Vogel uses in his entire journal, whereas in this journal I just used this style for January. In terms of timing, each of the weekly spreads, and there were 5 of those, took about 12 minutes per spread, so essentially an hour dedicated to just setting up weekly spreads. As said, for each of these though, I did have a little bit of a difference between them. So on some of them, I turned that 8th box into a this week or like notes, general weekly tasks kind of space. Essentially whatever our giveaway winner wanted to use it for though, because I just titled it as this week. And I also changed up the style of decoration in terms of whether that decoration was placed within the boxes or out of them if I was using a quote. To help me speed up my process a bit, as I went through, I also used a stencil that I have from Oops-a-Daisy, because the size of the stencil is the same size as the boxes I was drawing in here. This stencil I have found quite useful for Vogel's journal, because as said, he does the same style of weekly for every single week. And because it's sized appropriately to that style of weekly, it means that I don't have to do as much measuring and ruling and all of that kind of thing. It's really just highlighted to me the power of using tools to help you make your process faster so that you can spend more of that time, effort, energy on other areas of the setup, whether that be the decoration or like functional planning, organization, whatever it is. On this third weekly here, I also included a quote, this one saying, don't compare your start to someone else's middle. I liked it because I was hoping that this journal would go to a journal newbie, someone who hasn't really done a lot of bullet journaling before, and it was also the middle of the month, so the quote kind of made sense in my eyes. One of the things that I wanted to be very mindful of in the setup of this journal is how our winner could use it in a way to help achieve their goals. For that reason, I wanted to build in a lot of different structures that they could use to reflect on their process, consider which actions had happened versus ones they still had to complete, and I wanted to make sure that these were available at key points that I consider for reflection. One of those is the mid-month reflection, so after doing 3 of the weekly spreads, or essentially as close to the middle of the month as I could make it, I wanted to include a mid-month reflection space. Because I know that reflection doesn't necessarily come easily to everybody, I wanted to scaffold this one out with some key areas that our giveaway winner could reflect on. The style that I've used is very much related to goal reflection, so considering where we're up to in terms of the progress we're making, what actions have been completed, what wins or milestones we've met, and for each of the areas of reflection, I just included a box on the layout. Before putting in the structure though, I did have to struggle through trying to decorate the bottom of the left-hand page. After laying certain stickers down, I was like, yeah, no, that's not gonna work there, and had to pull them up. And then of course, because they're PET tapes, I do find that if you pull them in just the right way, they have a tendency to rip. Thankfully, we didn't have any damage of the page, but it was a little bit frustrating and a little bit fiddly. On this left-hand page though, the sections that I've included are a space to outline any achievements or things that have been completed by this stage of the month, which is also a space to record any wins that they've accomplished. There's a box to indicate anything that hasn't been completed, so this could be things that they've started but they're not quite finished, or things that haven't been started at all. On the lower side, we have a space for challenges and for learnings, and I've made both of those boxes smaller, mainly because oftentimes we have a little bit of a negativity bias. It's a little bit easier to pick out things that haven't been going so well rather than the things that have. So I definitely wanted to make sure that that wins or achieved section was larger. And in terms of learnings, how much we can learn about ourselves as goal getters will kind of vary from month to month, really depends on what's been happening. And because this is an area that could be a little bit daunting or a little bit new, I decided to make the box a little smaller so it's less intimidating. On the right hand side of the layout though, we again have 4 boxes, these ones being for taking forward and leaving behind. So this could be about tactics or mindsets or strategies, things that are working and we want to lean into and do more of, versus the things that aren't really working, we want to leave them behind, maybe find a different strategy or tweak them, change them to make more progress in the future part of the month. And then the lower 2 boxes on this one are for priorities and for before the new month. In this case, before February. I see the lists of priorities versus before to be different things. Priorities are kind of what they sound like. They're the things that you want to prioritize, whereas things to do before the month aren't necessarily priorities, but other stuff that you want to include on your task lists. You could also consider this as being priorities for things that are goal related versus the before the next month list to be non-goal related. But in terms of timing, setting up the mid-month reflection took about 20 minutes. I do hope that our winner finds the mid-month reflection helpful. I know that I find it really helpful for just re-motivating myself to get more done with the leftover part of the month, especially because a lot of people with their new year goals and such will quit before the mid-month point of January. I don't want that to happen to our winner. I also don't want that to happen to you. If you are hoping to set and plan goals for next year that actually get accomplished, then I would definitely love to help you with that. Goal setting, planning, and getting is one of my biggest passion points, and all of the goal-related sections that I've included in this journal setup and the ones that I use in my own are very much related to the teachings that we have over at Epic Goals. There's a link to that in the description if you need some help with your goal setting and planning for the new year. So if you really wanted a shortcut for making sure that your goal setting process is as effective as possible, make sure to check that one out. On this layout here though, we're setting up another weekly because the month is not over. Again, using the same style, but this time using a this week box instead of a quote box. I effectively just alternated between the two of those different styles throughout the entire of the month, just changing up either which type of box I used or the positioning of that box. It makes for layouts that are very cohesive with each other. They all look kind of similar, but they do have their small differences, whether that be in the styling or the decoration. Although the layouts themselves are quite simple when it comes to these weeklies, I think they're still quite visually effective because of the added decorative elements, whether those be the stickers or the color lines. And if you were looking to make a layout like this for yourself, there are a lot of different ways you can change it up, whether that be different lettering, different decorative pieces, or even just different line work. So I've used dashed lines in this one. You could use full ruled boxes, you could take the ruling out completely and just make them free floating sections. There are a lot of different options you can choose depending on your own personal journaling style. Going from a weekly without a quote box to one that does have one, this being the 5th weekly setup for January. I in particular decided to include this one in the January setup because there are more days of the week that fall in January compared to February, and that's typically the rule of thumb I use for weekly setups, putting them within whichever month has the most days for the week. The quote that I ended up going with on this layout though says, "We don't need perfection to make real progress." Especially at the start of the year when, we're trying to get in, work on our goals and all of that kind of thing, we can be really hard on ourselves when we get to that first day where we effectively let ourselves down. Maybe we skipped a workout, or we didn't hit our water intake goal, or we effectively set some kind of promise for ourselves that we didn't follow through on. Oftentimes this can be our downfall. This is where we start to think like, oh, it's obviously not working out for me, I'm not going to hit or accomplish the goal that I set for myself this year, I might as well quit. But really, this is just an invitation to recommit, or possibly reevaluate. Maybe the strategy we've been trying isn't really working and we should tweak it and maybe try something new. We can still make genuine progress through imperfect action. So I wanted a little quote on this spread to make sure that the person using the journal remembers that. As already mentioned, I love reflection, and the end of the month is a perfect time for reflection. So I also wanted to include an end of month reflection space for our winner. This one has some sections that are similar to the mid-month reflection because we're now reflecting for the entire of the month, not just the first half. But because this one is a little bit more summative, we also have a couple of other sections as well. I of course had to go in first and put in those header bars, again using that washi tape trick to make sure that they were nice and crisp and clean, and then using those broken lines to put in each of the boxes that we're going to have for reflective spaces. On the left hand side of this layout, we're again going to have a space for any wins or accomplishments from the month, this time thinking about a month-long timeline, not just the first half, and also a space to record any memories from the month. I like to think of the end of month reflection as kind of like a summary of the month as a whole, so often bringing in elements that aren't specifically goal related. But one of the sections that I do consider to be goal related is the challenges section. Again, I'm making that section smaller than the wins, so as not to dwell on the challenges, but acknowledge the fact that they happened, honor that challenge and note it down. The learning space that I end up putting down the bottom of that left-hand page is bigger than the challenges, mainly because we can learn not only from our challenges, but also from the things that were considered wins. For instance, what made that win more likely to happen? For the actions we did take, what made them easy to take? These are things that we can apply to our future goal getting to make it so that we make more progress. On the right hand side of the layout though, up the top I'm going to have a box for a monthly highlight, so anything that was kind of a standout point in the month, anything that felt most special, like most like an accomplishment, the most memorable of the moments. But the other 3 boxes that I'll have over here are needs, to try, and this month. In the needs section, this is thinking about the month ahead and stuff that we might need in terms of our journal or organizational systems, or they could of course apply this to their goal getting as well, like what kind of strategies might be useful or might be needed in order to make more progress. And the to try section is also something that I typically use when I'm thinking about my journal, like is there any new layout that I want to try? Are there any strategies for filling in my daily logs that I want to use? Anything like that. And then that other section, the this month box, is really for anything they want to record about the month in general. This could be, for instance, their month in media consumption, like which books did they read, which movies did they watch. It could be a space to do some journaling or some reflective thoughts, really anything they want to use to sum up the month. In terms of the decoration on this layout, we of course have those PET florals again, but I also wanted to put in some little, I guess we could call them quotes, I don't know, it just says thanks January and bring on February. In terms of timing, this layout also took about 20 minutes to set up. And as per every layout, that doesn't include the idea generation time or the pre-planning time. I have been asked previously how much time that takes me, and it's really hard to say because I don't necessarily think about the structure of the layouts all at once. It's like, do I also include like random shower thoughts about the layouts? And in that case, do I include the entire duration of my shower or just like when the inspiration struck? It can be a little bit hard to judge. As a good rule of thumb though, if you effectively double it, that's probably the best estimate I could give. But flipping back so that we can flip forward, I really like how this one came together, especially that cover page with the Bitsy wave. That is my favorite style of cover page. I just think that this is a really bright and fun theme to enter the new year with, and I hope our giveaway winner likes it as well. It's certainly interesting doing a flip through where we have the entire of the month set up at once, so not just those start of month pages, but also all of the weeklies. Let me know if you're the kind of person who sets everything up at once, or if you only do those kind of initial monthly pages. I of course primarily use dailies in my setups, so I don't often go and set those up ahead of time. I don't necessarily know how much space I'm going to need for them. But if you were on the hunt for more January journal inspiration, then this playlist is the next one to check out. That one has all of my previous January setups, including some of my most favorite journal themes, so click or tap on that one and I'll see you over there.